In Bullshit Jobs, David Graeber endeavours to show that almost half of employment in wealthy societies is useless, not only for society, but also businesses. Graeber provides a wide range of examples, but tends to focus on the mid to high salary professions. You'll have to read the book to ascertain whether or not you agree with the hypothesis, but I'm certain many will agree that various occupations and even industries, accountants specialising in tax avoidance, for example, could vanish completely without a negative effect on society whatsoever. If we accept the idea that almost half of the work done could disappear without a real effect on overall productivity, then what could arise would be a redistribution of work, whereby tasks could be shared by a large group of people. We could work for less hours a day, less days a week, and take longer holidays. Many people of the not so distant past believed that this is the effect that increasing automation would have. Automation and artificial intelligence has indeed advanced massively, and will only continue to do so, and yet we're working more than ever before. People would be free to pursue their interests, have more time for leisure and personal fulfillment. This is an important argument, and extensive personal freedom should not be exclusive to the super rich, nor should basic necessities and amenities be contingent on full-time employment. But more crucially perhaps, a de-escalation of excessive industry or degrowth would have a considerable impact on tackling ecological breakdown, and would be more effective than practically any other initiative. We've already seen this in action, with global carbon emissions dropping significantly in the wake of coronavirus and responsive lockdowns. Granted, global national crises have typically been followed by a temporary drop in carbon emissions, for example World War II and the 2008 financial crisis. But according to empirical studies, an absolute decoupling of economic growth from the use of natural resources is impossible. So we're going to need to make some radical changes if we wish to overcome this challenge. Capitalism and the focus on GDP is completely irreconcilable with degrowth and thus decarbonisation. However, such a change seems unattainable, given certain notions regarding work that also make it difficult to argue for more humane work hours and a fairer distribution of tasks. This chapter doesn't focus on the superfluousness of certain jobs, but traces an anthropological picture of how people relate to the concept of work. Graeber draws from history and theology to present a fascinating overview and answers the following question: why do we as a society not object to the growth of pointless employment? Value. When discussing work and the economy, the concept of value is central. In English, we distinguish between value, in the uncountable form, and values, in the plural. The former relates to economic activities, things that are paid for, and the latter relates to values that do not concern money, for example family values, religious values, and so forth, all of which involve a considerable amount of labour. In the case of family, for example, housework. Value is a useful tool because it allows us to make precise comparisons between different objects, commodities, and services. You can accurately compare the value between completely different things: a bag of compost, a flat screen TV, and a new bathroom installation. However, with values in the plural, such comparisons would not work. It's nonsensical to debate which is more beautiful between a Rembrandt and a Monet. The result of this distinction between value and values is that a clear line is drawn between two realms of life: the value-based economy, where activities are paid for, and the world of values, where activities are done for the sake of any other reason. In reality, it's impossible to separate the two spheres in such a way. Indeed, through the majority of human history, it wouldn't have been done. The idea of separate spheres of life emerged around 600 BC, with the rise of impersonal markets around Eurasia. Cash markets facilitated strangers to interact with each other with the sole aim of material advantage. Interestingly, Graeber points out that where such markets appeared, they were soon followed by the birth of universal religions, which propagated the importance of moral altruism in contrast with the unimportance of material goods, thus trying to draw a line between the two arenas. This has, however, been largely unsuccessful. Today, businesses and successful business people engage in values-based, often ineffectual, PR activities gestures and donations to climate change or BLM or general philanthropy. On the other side of the coin, we have religious spiritual leaders and artists who end up pursuing material gain. And the most common example is that people tend to strive to secure meaningful work that can have a positive impact on the world or make a difference. The majority of us expect our jobs to have value or serve some purpose. Graeber points to the phenomenon whereby the amount of societal and human value work has is inversely correlated with wages gained. Care workers, nurses, teachers, and cleaners do a great deal for the functioning and posterity of wealthy societies, and yet they get paid very little. The more that work makes a meaningful contribution to the world, the less that one tends to get paid for it. A tragic realization. Though there are exceptions to this rule, namely doctors and medical researchers, the situation is largely so. Relative value of professions is a difficult thing to study because contribution to society is largely subjective, but Graeber cites a number of studies which support the trend. The New Economic Foundation in 2009 in the UK, using a method called social return and investment analysis, looked at the relative effects of high income and low income professions. At the top of the scale were city bankers earning £5 million per annum, who destroyed an estimated value of £7 for every £1 earned. On the other hand, nursery workers with a salary of £11,500 generated £7 of social value for every £1 earned. There are a number of common arguments as to why this is the case, but they often fall flat. One argument concerns education levels, in that large salaries can be justified by illustrious qualifications. However, if salaries were a reflection of education, then we would not have such a large amount of PhD students subsisting on meagre salaries. Another argument is supply and demand, in that high paid salaries exist because the supply of competent candidates is sufficiently low. However, this would not explain why nurses are paid so poorly and yet are in such high demand, and why lawyers are paid so handsomely despite the oversaturation of law graduates. The final argument, and most cynical, is that workers who provide tangible social value do not need to be paid well because of the satisfaction they will gain from doing valuable labour and helping others. In essence, that virtue should be its own reward. In response to this hypothetical argument, Graeber references the work of moral philosopher G.A. Cohen, who made a case for the equality of income. It would take some time to summarise, but the simplified conclusion is that this view stems from a decision to, on one hand, say that the egoists who are selfish deserve to be rewarded, yet it makes a moral case that those who are altruistic should take solace in their good deeds. This is an unjust way to distribute wages. Theology. Many people believe strongly that to work is intrinsically good. Many people believe, perhaps even more strongly, that to avoid work is bad. In other words, undertaking miserable, ineffectual, or demeaning work is morally superior to doing no work at all. The contention is widespread, especially when looking at the narrative promulgated by prominent media outlets. In the UK, the tabloids and broadsheets consistently demonise lazy benefit scroungers shirking work. And there was a spate of Channel 4 documentaries televising the most depraved actions they could find of working class people living on welfare. The grotesque ensemble of Little Britain featured dim-witted Andy from Manchester, who pretended to need a wheelchair so as to dupe an innocent man into assisting him. Like so many assumptions in contemporary Western society, these roots can be found in Judeo-Christian religion. The act of work was perhaps first documented in the Genesis and the epic poetry of Hesiod. In Prometheus and the Bible, work was depicted as a punishment forced upon man when he defied his divine creator. Banished from paradise and destined to be free, humans needed to harness the force of creation in order to survive. The Lord God banished him from the Garden of Eden to work the ground from which he had been taken. God said to men, "By the sweat of your brow you will eat your food." And to women, God said, "I will make your pains in childbearing very severe. With painful labour you will give birth to children." When God kicked Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden, he sentenced women to the labour of childbirth and men to physical labour. To men and women, both statements were meant simultaneously as punishment, but also as an opportunity for humans to imitate God's divine power of creation. This damnation echoes in contemporary perspectives of work. Firstly, work is something we do that we would not choose to do for its own sake. Thus, it is punishment. Secondly, we work because of the result that we wish to accomplish. Thus, it is creation. In the Middle Ages, the Church held huge sway over all aspects of life, especially economic affairs. Indeed, many core economic assumptions can be traced back to theological notions. St. Augustine, hugely influential Christian theologian and philosopher, argued that humans are cursed with unlimited desires in a world of finite resources and thus are naturally competitive. This theory was eventually given a secular backing with Thomas Hobbes in the 17th century, who set out the long-accepted savage beast conception of humankind. The natural condition of mankind is a state of war. Life was a solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. He argued that rational human action is nothing but selfish economization in a competitive battle for limited resources.